Battle stations now. Captain Dax Vanard's voice sliced through the air, sharp and commanding. His fingers moved quickly over the heads-up display, his mind already calculating the movements of the incoming fleet. His eyes narrowed as the sleek bioluminescent ships appeared on the radar, their edges gleaming like polished glass. They were here. Ronak Halvorn, Lieutenant Commander and Dax's trusted second-in-command, stood behind him, his gaze fixed on the holographic display. Rixian fleet just breached our perimeter, Captain. They're close enough now to engage, but there's something strange about their formation. Dax didn't turn from the display. Strange how? They're not attacking. They're just hovering, Ronak replied, tapping a few commands into his own console. They're trying to overwhelm us with their presence, not firepower. Perfect. Let them think it's a spectacle, Dax muttered, a ghost of a smile forming on his lips. He gestured toward the comms officer. Get them on screen, Walsh. Let's see what these self-proclaimed conquerors have to say. The screen flickered to life, revealing a towering figure, the Fleetsian ambassador Vareth. His bioluminescent form pulsed rhythmically, shimmering like a creature from the deep ocean. His eyes, piercing and cold, fixed on the humans as if surveying them like cattle. He spoke, his voice carrying a strange melodic cadence, polished to an unnatural smoothness. Greetings, Terran species, Vareth began, his words dripping with a mix of grandeur and disdain. We, the Atrixian Empire, extend a great and generous offer to your people. Your civilization may join the greater collective. Your primitive ways can evolve into something more magnificent. We have come to bestow upon you the honor of integration. The bridge fell silent for a heartbeat. Dax's expression didn't change, but Ronak's lips curled slightly in silent amusement. The ambassador's presence might be imposing, but it was nothing they hadn't faced before. I see, Dax finally said, his voice calm and deliberate. And what do you think we get out of this honor, Ambassador? Vareth's glowing appendages twitched, as though momentarily thrown off. Your species would benefit from the advanced technologies and knowledge of the Atrixian Empire. The integration of our cultures would bring untold prosperity, uniting your world under a banner of magnificence and order. Dax leaned back in his chair, his hands steepling in front of him. Prosperity, he repeated, his tone just this side of dry. How quaint. And I'm assuming you've assumed that we'd be just thrilled by your magnificence, correct? Vareth's gaze hardened, but he maintained his composure. Your primitive ships pale in comparison to ours. We have never lost a battle, and we expect this to be no different. Yet here you are, Dax replied smoothly, in our space, not firing a single shot. The mighty Atrixians have decided to grace us with their presence, and all you've brought is light shows. The ambassador's bioluminescence flickered in what might have been irritation. He took a step forward, his tentacles moving like flowing silk. We've conquered 17 species without ever needing to fire a weapon. You should be honored. It is an opportunity for your species to join a superior civilization, to rise beyond your meager existence. I've got a better idea, Dax said, his voice low and calm, yet piercing. Why don't you show us how impressive your fleet is? Fire a few rounds. Give us a taste of that so-called superiority. Let's see if it can stand up to what Earth has been quietly preparing for the past few decades. Vareth's eyes narrowed, his expression faltering for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. You dare challenge the Atrixians? His voice was cold now, the arrogance back in full force. We are an empire that has never been defeated. You will learn your place in this galaxy. Dax's lips twitched, though he kept his eyes fixed on the ambassador. Oh, I'm sure we will, he said, but it won't be the lesson you think it will be. Enough of your insolence. Vareth spat, his voice rising. Prepare yourselves, humans. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The transmission cut off abruptly, and the room was filled with an unsettling silence. Admiral, Ronak spoke, his voice cool. They're positioning themselves for an attack. They're testing us. But they've made one mistake. And what's that? Dax asked, still calm. They're assuming we're just another species to dominate. That's the part they've got wrong. Dax rose from his chair, his gaze fixed on the enormous Atrixian fleet. Let's show them what happens when you miscalculate. Prepare the fleet. This isn't going to be a show for their entertainment. The crew moved with the quiet efficiency that only years of practice could bring. Every action on the bridge was seamless, coordinated. Tension hummed in the air, but it was an undercurrent, never fully breaking the surface. The Aerith strike would make sure the Exrixians got their first lesson in humanity's survival tactics. "Ready for engagement, sir," Ronak called from his station. Dax turned toward the viewport, his face now a mask of cold determination. "Let's make sure they understand, this isn't about beauty, Ambassador. This is about power, and they're about to get their first taste." The Aerith strike began to move forward, its massive form cutting through the dark void, the hum of its engines steady, unyielding. Dax felt the familiar calm before battle settle into his bones. This was what they had trained for, what they had built for. As the Exrixian fleet continued to float just beyond Earth's orbit, poised in all their crystalline splendor, they were about to face something they had never seen before. A human fleet that wasn't here to entertain. It wasn't about grand gestures, it was about dominance, real, unyielding, and absolute. "Is that what they call a battle fleet?" Ronak Halvorn's voice sliced through the silence of the bridge, his tone heavy with skepticism as he watched the Asrixian ships float at the edge of Earth's defense perimeter. Their bioluminescent designs shimmered with an almost serene elegance, clearly meant to impress, but to Ronak, it only confirmed their arrogance. "They believe their ships are invincible," Captain Dax Vanard said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable confidence. "They might be shiny, but they're paper-thin." He adjusted the settings on his heads-up display, the glow illuminating his face in sharp contrast to the calm demeanor he wore. His fingers moved methodically across the controls, a visual representation of the years of preparation that had led to this moment. Ambassador Varick's transmission still lingered in the air, the words of grandeur and superiority now sounding hollow to Dax's ears. The Asrixian envoy had made his point. Humanity was weak, and their technology was outdated. Their ships, mere relics of a bygone age, would be no match for the sheer power of the Asrixian fleet. How foolish the ambassador was to underestimate humanity. Dax turned to his crew, his gaze steady. "Time to show them how outdated we really are." General Ilias Mornar's voice cut through the calm, his tone clinical. "I've been running simulations on their fleet, sir. The Asrixians are overconfident. Their ships rely too much on their hull's strength. It's not a question of firepower. It's a matter of how quickly we can target their vulnerabilities." He glanced over at Dax, eyes sharp. "If we hit their engines, their entire fleet will fall apart." "Then let's make sure they don't see it coming," Dax replied, standing from his chair. "Prepare for a first demonstration. I want our tactics to be flawless." Without hesitation, the crew moved with practiced precision. Ronak's fingers danced across his own display, adjusting the coordinates for a strategic maneuver. On the bridge, every member of the crew moved like they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The atmosphere was tense, but not a single person showed fear. They were ready. "Lieutenant Walsh," Dax said, addressing the comms officer, who had been silent until now, "send a message to the Asrixian fleet. Let them know we've decided to respond to their invitation." A pause, then Walsh's voice came through, clear and efficient. "Message sent, sir. Awaiting a response." On the large plasma display at the front of the bridge, the enemy fleet still remained in their orbit, seemingly unaffected. Dax studied their formation closely, noting the way they hovered, elegant and unyielding. There was an inherent flaw in their confidence, a flaw that Dax was about to exploit. "We're ready, Captain," Ronak said, the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Course plotted. Should I engage?" "Do it," Dax ordered, his voice steady. With a sharp, practiced movement, Ronak initiated the maneuver. The Ares strike and its fleet moved with the sudden, quiet efficiency of a predator, slipping through space with the precision only Earth's military could manage. In a matter of seconds, the first move was executed. A series of sudden, rapid vector shifts that caught the Asrixians completely off guard. On the Asrixian flagship, Ambassador Varick and his officers stared at the unexpected movement, a slight tremor rippling through the bridge. "What is this?" Varick hissed, his voice a blend of disbelief and growing unease. "What trickery are they using?" Back on the human side, the Ares strike launched its first salvo, a series of targeted high-powered railgun projectiles aimed squarely at the Asrixian fleet's propulsion systems. Each shot was designed to destabilize, to disrupt the Asrixians' ability to maneuver. As the projectiles slammed into their targets, the Ares strike slid effortlessly out of view, cloaking itself in the vastness of space. "Target their engines," Dax commanded, his eyes never leaving the display. "We'll make them realize what happens when you underestimate humanity's resolve." On the laser plasma display, the Eryxian fleet was now scrambling, their ships shifting erratically. The first Eryxian warship, a behemoth of crystal and light, began to falter. Its propulsion system, torn apart by the human weaponry, sputtered as its engine core imploded, sending out a shockwave of sparks and debris that rippled through the fleet. "What the hell is happening?" Varith's voice shook with frustration. "This can't be possible." "Looks like they didn't see this coming," Ronak muttered, his fingers moving swiftly over his console. "The fleet's throwing everything into evasive maneuvers now. They're panicking." The Eryxian ships, previously so confident, now appeared disorganized. They launched weapons, but their shots were wild, missing their targets by wide margins. The humans had done something the Eryxians hadn't even considered. They had adapted to the situation with ruthless efficiency. It wasn't about brute force, it was about precision, about taking the right targets and dismantling the enemy with surgical strikes. Dax watched intently as the Ares strike engaged in its second move. The ship weaved through the chaos with calculated grace, positioning itself perfectly to hit another weak spot in the Eryxian formation. The human fleet continued its assault, using every advantage they had: stealth, speed, and overwhelming tactical brilliance. The Eryxians, still struggling to regain control, finally attempted to retaliate, but by then it was already too late. The human fleet had already torn through the heart of their formation. Eryxian ships exploded one by one, their once glorious designs now reduced to drifting fragments in the cold vacuum of space. Varith's voice crackled over the comms once more, his tone a mixture of disbelief and fear. "This is impossible. We are the Eryxian Empire. You cannot defeat us like this." Dax's smile remained unchanged. "You might want to rethink that assessment." As the battle unfolded before them, the Eryxian arrogance crumbled. The pride they had so carefully cultivated, believing themselves invincible, had been shattered in a matter of minutes. Their ships, fragile in their grandiosity, stood no chance against the cold, calculated precision of humanity's military force. The human fleet disengaged, leaving the Eryxian forces in disarray. On the Ares strike, the crew held their positions, their movements methodical and calm as they prepared for the next phase of the operation. There was no need for celebration, this was merely the first move in a much larger game. Dax turned to Ronak, his expression unreadable. "Prepare for the next phase. We'll give them a moment to think." The Eryxians had underestimated humanity's capacity for combat. Now they would have to face the consequences. "All systems ready, Captain." Ronak's voice echoed from across the bridge, cool and controlled, though there was a trace of something deeper, something almost imperceptible, beneath his calm exterior. The Ares strike was primed. The crew at attention. The Eryxian fleet, battered but not broken, had regained some semblance of composure, but Dax knew they were far from ready. "Are they moving?" Dax asked, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the heads-up display. The plasma display flickered briefly, before showing the Eryxian ships, still poised but now slowly closing the gap. Their brilliant light displays continued to pulse, but there was a shift in their movement, a shift that told Dax the Eryxians were no longer relying purely on intimidation. "They're advancing, sir," Ronak replied. "We've got incoming fire in 5 seconds. Let them come," Dax muttered under his breath, leaning forward in his chair. "Activate the countermeasures. Give them the welcome they're looking for." The bridge hummed with energy, as Dax's crew sprung into action, each person moving seamlessly, their years of training evident in the way they responded without hesitation. The Eryxians had underestimated humanity, but now they would face the full force of Earth's readiness. The Eryxians opened fire first. Massive energy pulses streaked across space, slicing through the void with a searing intensity. The shots, though powerful, missed their mark. Earth's ships, much smaller in comparison, but far more agile, danced around the incoming fire with a swift grace. The Eryxians' advanced weaponry was supposed to overwhelm them, but instead, their energy beams fizzled out into the vacuum, harmlessly dissipating. "Ha! Is that the best they've got?" Ronak chuckled softly, as he expertly veered their ship out of the line of fire. "Not yet," Dax replied, his eyes glued to the moving formations. "But they're learning fast." "Opening fire," Ronak declared, and before he had even finished speaking, the first barrage from the Ares strike ripped through the silence, a flurry of kinetic projectiles that screamed through space and struck the first Adrixian warship with bone-shaking force. The explosion was immediate, bright, violent, a burst of radiant energy that painted the dark canvas of space in fiery hues. The Adrixian ship disintegrated into shards of crystalline debris, floating in all directions. Dax's eyes flicked across the display. The response was almost immediate. The Adrixians, their pride hurt, retaliated with more coordinated fire. The rest of their fleet engaged, their ships aligning and firing with precision, launching energy bolts that illuminated the stars. But Dax and his crew were ready. The human fleet moved with brutal efficiency, countering each attack, dodging, weaving, and firing back with a combination of advanced missiles and railguns, each shot landing with surgical precision. "This is too easy," Ronak muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But the words rang true. Every strike from the Adrixians was met with a counter, every attack rendered useless against the defensive tactics the humans had perfected. "Don't get cocky," Dax said, his voice steady. "They're getting desperate. It's not over yet." As the battle raged, General Ilias Mornar's voice crackled over the comm. "Captain, we've identified their weaknesses. Target their engine cores. The outer hulls are too reinforced, but their propulsion systems are vulnerable. We'll cripple them if we hit those spots." "Understood," Dax responded. He signaled to Ronak, and in an instant, the fleet shifted direction. The Ares strike cut through the darkness like a predator closing in on its prey, its weapons firing in a rapid barrage. Earth's ships took aim at the Adrixian fleet's engines, the railguns firing in rapid succession, sending shockwaves across space. The first Adrixian vessel targeted exploded in a spectacular burst, its engines igniting in a fiery inferno, as if the very heart of the ship had been torn apart. The Adrixians were reeling, the initial overconfidence they'd displayed, now replaced with desperation. The larger part of their fleet scattered, trying to regroup, but Earth's ships, smaller and quicker, pursued with relentless precision. They didn't give the Adrixians a chance to recover. "Switch to ambush mode," Dax commanded, his voice calm, but with an edge of anticipation. "Ronak, I want their flanks exposed." Within moments, the Ares strike and the other warships in the fleet flanked the Adrixians, positioning themselves in a perfect trap. The Adrixian ships were caught in a deadly crossfire, caught in their own arrogance. With Earth's fleet closing in, they had nowhere to retreat, nowhere to hide. The Adrixian ships that had thought themselves untouchable now found themselves fighting a losing battle. One by one, the Adrixian warships succumbed. Each hull cracked under the sheer force of Earth's firepower, the crystalline structures of the alien ships, no match for the concentrated weaponry humanity had developed. The space around them was filled with brilliant flashes of light, a galaxy being torn apart as Earth's military strength showed its dominance. "Another one down," Ronak noted, as he watched another Adrixian ship fragment under the fire. "This is too easy, Dax. They're falling apart. Don't get complacent. Keep pushing," Dax responded, his voice steady and calculated. "We finish this now." The Adrixian fleet, scattered and confused, began to retreat. The remaining ships attempted to regroup, but they were too far gone. The battle had been lost, not in a single mighty blow, but in a series of calculated moves that tore through their strategy. Humanity hadn't fought them with overwhelming strength alone. They had outsmarted them at every turn, every move. The last remaining Adrixian ship, now crippled, attempted to flee, but it was no use. As it tried to escape, its remaining engines sputtered, and its hull began to break apart from the impact of multiple direct hits. One final missile from the Ares strike sealed its fate, the explosion shattering the ship's core, sending debris scattering across the vacuum of space. "All enemy ships destroyed, Captain," Ronak reported, his voice now tinged with disbelief. "We've wiped them out." Dax leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled before him, studying the aftermath of the battle. His gaze never wavered. "We've shown them what happens when you challenge Earth." On the bridge, the tension began to ease. The crew exchanged brief looks, their faces masks of professional stoicism, but beneath the surface, a sense of pride was unmistakable. They had won. The Adrixians, so sure of their superiority, had been soundly defeated, but Dax knew this wasn't over. The Adrixians would not concede defeat so easily. They would regroup, learn from their mistakes. The real fight had only just begun. "Stay sharp, everyone," Dax said, his voice still steady, though the battle's adrenaline began to settle in. "They'll be back. And next time, they won't be caught off guard." The silence on the Ares strike bridge was thick, almost suffocating. The Ysrixian fleet was gone, retreating into the void after their defeat. The victory felt bitter, too easy. Dax Vanard stood still, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the starfield ahead of him. Despite the wind, something gnawed at him, an unease he couldn't shake. He wasn't sure if it was the battle itself, or the way the Ysrixians had retreated without even a final shot, but it felt too quiet, too calculated. "Are they regrouping?" Ronak Halvorn's voice cut through the tension as he observed the digital readouts on his console. "They'll be back," Dax replied flatly. "We've made an impression, but we haven't broken them." On the other side of the galaxy, aboard the Crystal Dominance, Admiral Zerak of the Ysrixian fleet stood in front of his command staff. The alien ships, once gleaming with pride, were now tattered and broken, scattered debris from the confrontation, still drifting in space like a macabre display of defeat. Zerak clenched his fists at his sides, the glowing bioluminescence of his skin flickering with barely restrained fury. "How could this happen?" Zerak hissed, his voice cold as ice. He stared out of the large viewports of the flagship, eyes narrowed as he watched the debris float in the void. "We, who have never lost a battle, were outmaneuvered by these humans. What did we miss?" One of his officers, a dark and angular figure named Silith, spoke up, her voice sharp and calculating. "Admiral, we underestimated them. We assumed that their ships, old and seemingly outdated, would be no match for the superiority of our fleet." "Not just that," Zerak muttered, turning away from the viewport. "Their tactics were too efficient. It wasn't just about firepower, it was about adaptability. They adapted to every move we made, and turned our own strategy against us." He turned his gaze to the rest of his officers, his expression grim. "We need to rethink everything." The room fell silent for a long moment before Zerak's voice broke the stillness. "Prepare the next phase of the plan. I will not allow this defeat to define the Ysrixian Empire." Back on the Ares strike, Dax felt the weight of the situation. The Ysrixians were unpredictable, and their retreat spoke volumes. The humans had forced them back, but at what cost? It was only a matter of time before the Ysrixians returned. They wouldn't go quietly. A soft chime echoed through the bridge, breaking his thoughts. It was the comms officer. "Captain, we've received a transmission. It's from the Ysrixians. They want to talk." Dax's gaze flicked to the laser plasma display. A moment later, Ambassador Varith's image flickered to life, his form standing before them with a cold elegance. His translucent body pulsed with light, the bioluminescent glow now tinged with something darker, anger perhaps. His voice, when it came, was controlled but laced with the simmering tension of defeat. "Captain Vanard," Varith's voice oozed with venom, "you have made your point. Your human vessels are capable of destruction, but do not mistake this for victory. The Ysrixian Empire does not suffer losses. We do not bow to primitive forces like yours." Dax leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "You didn't come here to threaten. You came to beg for a second chance." His words were quiet, but there was a weight to them, an underlying certainty that caught Varith off guard. "There is no begging in the Ysrixian Empire." Varith spat, his glowing appendages shaking. "But there are alternatives. Your species has potential. We could still offer you the chance to join us, to evolve under our protection. If you yield now, we might consider sparing you the shame of further conflict." Dax's eyes locked onto the alien diplomats, his voice low but laced with the power of a man who had seen too much war to back down now. "The only thing we're interested in is peace, but it won't be under your terms. Not now, not ever." Varith's face shifted, the bioluminescence flickering in agitation. "You think this is over? You may have beaten us in one engagement, but you have no idea what we can bring to bear. We will not be mocked by your kind any longer." "Mocked? No. Defended? Yes." And don't think for a second we don't know what you're capable of, Dax said, his gaze hardening. But you'll need more than your arrogance to win this fight. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in silence. For a moment, no one moved, and the air hung heavy with tension. The Asryxians had played their hand, psychological warfare. They wanted to break humanity's resolve by threatening them with annihilation. But Dax knew that they would not back down. They'll try again. But this time, we'll be ready, Dax muttered, almost to himself. He turned to Ronak, his face impassive. Prepare our fleet. We're about to put them in a position they won't escape from. Ronak's eyes gleamed with understanding. You're going to trap them. Dax's lips curled into a faint, predatory grin. Exactly. We're going to give them a show they won't forget. Meanwhile, deep within the Asryxian fleet, Admiral Zerak paced his command deck, furiously communicating with his subordinates. He had refused to let his pride fracture. He would push humanity to the edge and beyond. The words he had spoken to Captain Vanard echoed in his mind, sharpening his thoughts. There is only one way to prove we are still superior. Zerak growled, staring into the vastness of space. We will destroy their fleet, but it won't be in open combat. No, we'll take a different approach. He turned to his officers, his eyes cold and calculating. We will target their leaders, their infrastructure. We'll use their own weapons against them. If they want to play with tactics, we'll show them what it truly means to wage a war of attrition. Zerak's officers nodded in agreement, the plan unfolding in their minds. They had to strike fast, hard, and unseen. The Asryxians would test humanity's resolve in a way they hadn't yet expected. On the Ares strike, Dax stood at the command center, staring out at the stars. The situation had changed. The Asryxians were regrouping, but they were underestimating one key factor: humanity's ability to adapt, to fight smarter. They'll come at us again, but this time, we'll be the ones controlling the game, Dax said, more to himself than anyone else. Prepare the trap. We'll force their hand. He turned, his voice now filled with quiet assurance. Get the fleet ready for the next phase. We're about to turn their own arrogance into their greatest weakness. As Dax prepared the strategy for their next confrontation, the stakes grew even higher. The Asryxians had underestimated humanity once again, but their pride had been bruised. The final push was coming, and humanity would be ready. They're coming. Ronak's voice broke the stillness, cold and sharp. Their entire fleet. They're moving in with everything they've got. Dax Vanard's eyes never left the laser plasma display as it flickered to life, revealing the advancing Asryxian fleet. The digital readouts filled the screen with ominous red blips, each one representing an enemy ship. The Asryxians, bruised and battered but still proud, had finally decided to throw everything into one last assault. There was no more room for negotiation. No more words. It would be a battle to the death. Engage all systems, Dax said, his voice low and calm. This is it. A low rumble echoed through the Ares strike. As the ship's systems powered up, the hum of the engines vibrating through the steel and the cold air of the bridge. The crew moved with practiced precision, every action timed to the millisecond. Their resolve was unshakable. They had fought too long and too hard to let this be the end. They think they can overwhelm us. General Ilias Mornar's voice came through, tight with resolve. But they'll never break us. I don't intend to let them, Dax replied. He glanced over his shoulder at Ronak, who had already begun feeding commands into his console. Activate the decoy signal. Let's draw them in. On the Ares strike, a series of small tactical displays flashed to life. The signal was simple, a faint echo of a much larger fleet, designed to lure the Asryxians right into their trap. The enemy fleet, already bloodied and eager for vengeance, wouldn't hesitate to take the bait. Dax's fingers tapped against the console, a quiet sound that punctuated the rising tension in the air. Once they're in range, cut the signal. We'll force them into the kill zone. The Asryxians, oblivious to humanity's trap, advanced. The plasma display flickered, showing their ships closing the distance. A moment later, the communication line buzzed to life. It was Varith again, his face as smug as ever, despite the chaos that had followed their retreat. Captain Vanard, Varith began, his tone dripping with condescension. You've earned your temporary victory, but you cannot win against the might of the Asryxian fleet. We will crush you, and your species will learn its place. Dax's fingers tapped steadily against the armrest. His voice was quiet, controlled. You're about to find out just how much you've underestimated us. The transmission abruptly ended, and the Ares strike lurched forward, moving swiftly into position. The Exrixians had taken the bait. Now, Dax's voice rang out sharply. At once, the signal was cut, and the real human fleet revealed itself. Earth's ships, hidden in plain sight, emerged from the shadows of the distant asteroid field, surrounding the Exrixians in an inescapable trap. The Exrixians' formation broke apart as their fleet scrambled to regroup, confusion spreading through their ranks. Target their engines, Dax barked. Let's finish this. The battle began in earnest. The Ares strike unleashed a brutal barrage, its railguns firing with pinpoint accuracy. The enemy ships, massive, beautiful in their own way, were torn apart piece by piece. Each explosion was a violent eruption of crystal and light, the Exrixians' pride reduced to mere shards in the vacuum of space. Earth's ships moved like a deadly swarm. Missiles streaked through the dark, their targets locked and tracked with frightening efficiency. The Exrixians tried to retaliate, firing back with energy beams, but the humans were faster, sharper. Every shot from the Exrixians was met with a calculated response. Every attack turned into an opportunity for Earth's ships to outmaneuver, outfight, and outsmart. In the midst of the chaos, Ronak's voice rang through the comms. Admiral, the flagship's vulnerability is exposed. We can take out the crystal dominance now, if we focus our fire. Dax didn't hesitate. Focus all fire on the crystal dominance. This ends now. The Ares strike and its fleet converged on the Exrixian flagship. The crystal dominance, a massive structure of glass-like material and bioluminescent beauty. The ship, once a symbol of invulnerability, now stood at the heart of the storm. Its shields flickered weakly under the barrage of fire. Brace for impact, Ronak warned. We've got a few seconds before their shields buckle. The crystal dominance fired its weapons in desperation, but Earth's warships danced around the blasts, positioning themselves for the final assault. Dax watched through the display as the Exrixian flagship's shields crumbled under the pressure. Now, Dax shouted. The final wave of missiles launched in perfect synchrony, and a deafening explosion ripped through the crystal dominance. The ship shuddered, its once pristine hull collapsing under the relentless fire. In the blink of an eye, the flagship, proud, imposing and untouchable, was nothing more than a drifting wreck, consumed by the violent explosion. Admiral Zarok watched in disbelief as his flagship was torn apart. The Exrixian fleet, once brimming with confidence, was now shattered. The remaining ships attempted to flee, but the humans were relentless, their weapons unforgiving. One by one, the Exrixian vessels fell, their bioluminescence extinguished forever. Damn them, Zarok muttered, his voice barely audible, as he stared at the destruction. We were so sure, we thought we could defeat them, break them, but this is impossible. He turned away from the viewport, his gaze cold. It's over. We've lost. On the Ares strike, the battle was won, but the cost was clear. The Exrixian fleet had been broken, their pride shattered. Earth's ships, bloodied but unbowed, remained standing, victorious. We've done it, Ronak said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, though the words felt hollow in the wake of the devastation. Dax stood still, his gaze locked on the void outside. It's not over, he said quietly, his voice low but firm. The Exrixians won't admit defeat this easily. They'll regroup, they'll try again, but now they know what we're capable of. Yes, Captain, Ronak replied, his voice heavy, and they'll never forget. As the Ares strike and the remaining human fleet drifted amidst the wreckage of the battle, Dax felt a quiet certainty settle over him. Humanity had won this fight, but a far larger war loomed on the horizon. The Exrixians would be back, and humanity would be ready. The aftermath of the final battle had left the Ares strike and its fleet in a near state of tranquility, as if the entire galaxy had taken a collective breath. The debris of the Exrixian fleet drifted through space, a reminder of humanity's raw power. But despite the victory, Captain Dax Vanard knew the war wasn't over, not yet. Humanity had proven its dominance, but the Rexians were not a species to accept defeat easily. Their pride had been bruised, but not broken. Dax stood at the front of the bridge, watching the stars through the massive viewport. His hands clasped behind his back, he observed the quiet bustle of the crew as they carried out their post-battle procedures. Despite their success, the feeling of unease lingered. The Rexians would not just disappear, they would regroup and rethink their approach. "Report," Dax ordered, not turning from the view. "Admiral Zurich has requested a ceasefire," Ronek Halvorn replied, his voice cool as always. "They want to open a channel for diplomatic talks. The Rexians are prepared to offer us something, an alliance." Dax's eyes narrowed, his fingers tapping against the armrest of his chair. An alliance. The word tasted strange in his mouth, but he knew it was a reality that could not be ignored. He had seen the Rexians' power, and he knew they would not back down forever. "Yes, Captain," Ronek said, adjusting the settings on his console. "They're offering a partnership. They admit that they've underestimated humanity's military capabilities, but they still believe there's value in working together." "Send them a message," Dax ordered, his tone sharp. "Tell them we'll consider their offer, but they'll speak to us on equal terms, or not at all." On the Exrixian flagship Crystal Dominance, Admiral Zurich stood in front of his war council, his normally confident stature now strained with uncertainty. The reality of their defeat had set in, and the alien fleet, once thought invincible, lay in ruins. Their arrogance had been their downfall. "Your arrogance led us here, Zurich," Silith, a senior officer, said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Now we face an enemy who can challenge us. We need to rethink everything." Zurich remained silent for a moment, staring out at the ruined remnants of their fleet. "I have always known that strength comes not just from power, but from adaptation, and we have adapted, at least we will." His voice hardened. "I'll propose an alliance. We have no choice but to accept that their military might exceeds ours for now. We will work with them, and in time, we will rise again." "An alliance?" Silith raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll accept?" "I have no choice," Zurich growled. "We will make them see reason." Back aboard the Ares strike, Captain Dax Vannard and diplomatic officer Dale Vriska stood before the heads-up display, awaiting the Exrixian ambassador's transmission. Dale, always the calm negotiator, adjusted his uniform, his sharp gaze never leaving the screen. He had been through enough tense negotiations to know when the balance of power had shifted, and this time, humanity held all the cards. The transmission clicked on, and Ambassador Vareth appeared once more, his glowing form as resplendent as ever. His bioluminescence flickered slightly, an indicator, perhaps, of the wariness that now underpinned his words. "Captain Vannard," Vareth began, his voice smooth but no longer brimming with the arrogance it once held, "the Rexian Empire has reconsidered. We acknowledge your victory, and we seek to move beyond conflict. We offer you an alliance, not as conquerors, but as partners. Our species can learn much from each other." Dax folded his arms, watching the ambassador carefully. "So now you seek partnership." His voice was steady, unwavering. "And what exactly does this alliance entail? What do you propose, Vareth?" "The Rexian Empire recognizes that brute force alone cannot conquer a species with such resilience," Vareth said, his voice now more thoughtful, less assured. "Your military is unparalleled, and we will not challenge you further. However, there are many other aspects we can share. Technology, biological advancements," and Dax cut him off, his tone unwavering. "We don't need your technology, we've built our own. What we need is respect. You will treat us as equals, or your offer is worth nothing." Vareth's appendages stiffened, a sign of frustration. "We are prepared to offer you technology, resources, and knowledge, an exchange of information and understanding. The Rexian Empire can help you grow, Captain Vannard. Together, we will be unstoppable." Dax stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "We're not interested in being helped. We're interested in being left alone. We're offering you the opportunity to join humanity on equal terms, not as a conquered people, but as allies. If that's not enough for you, then our negotiations end here." A long pause stretched between them, the tension thickening the air. Vareth's glowing face flickered with uncertainty, but after a long moment, he spoke again, this time with a hint of resignation in his voice. "Very well, Captain, we will accept your terms. We have been humbled." The words felt heavy, as if admitting their defeat was not easy, but necessary. "An alliance on your terms," In the war room aboard the Ares strike, Dax turned to Dale, his expression one of cautious optimism. Prepare a draft. Let's make sure they understand exactly what this alliance means. We take nothing less than full sovereignty and equal standing. No more superiority complexes. Dale nodded, a slight smile crossing his face. Understood, Captain. The Rexians had accepted their position, though still proud. Their arrogance had been shattered. The war, it seemed, had ended not with destruction, but with the careful balance of power tipping in humanity's favor. The Rexians had learned the hard way that strength did not lie solely in size or numbers, but in the ability to adapt and, above all, to never underestimate the resilience of a species that had fought for its very survival for centuries. But even as humanity emerged victorious, Dax knew that the war had taught them something invaluable. The galaxy would remember this battle, and humanity's role within it would never again be the same. No longer would they be seen as weak, as easy prey. Now Earth would be a player on the galactic stage, a force to be reckoned with. As the negotiations continued, and the Rexians signed their agreement, the stars outside the Ares strike remained as cold and indifferent as ever. "We're about to show them what they've been blind to all along," Captain Dax Vanard muttered under his breath. His eyes locked onto the display in front of him. The Ares strike was docked for routine repairs, but the work of preparing for a new phase in humanity's interaction with the Exrixians was already underway. The battle had ended, but the war for influence was only beginning. Dax knew the Exrixians had seen humanity's strength in combat, but that was only a small part of what Earth had truly accomplished. Behind him, the doors to the bridge opened with a soft hiss. Talden Cray, Earth's chief engineer, walked in, his uniform slightly disheveled from the hours spent overseeing the ship's repairs. His hands were clasped behind his back, his usual confident demeanor tinged with something new, anticipation. "Captain," Talden greeted, his voice sharp, his expression unreadable. "It's time to unveil the next step." Dax gave a brief nod. "Proceed." Talden stepped forward, tapping a few commands into the heads-up display, which shifted to show an intricate layout of the Ares strike's interior. "What you've seen so far, our weapons, our defenses, our ships, are only the tip of the iceberg. Humanity's true strength lies in what we've kept hidden." The image on the display shifted again, this time showing the blueprints of a series of advanced technologies humanity had developed in secret, technologies that stretched far beyond anything the Exrixians had encountered in battle. "This," Talden continued, "is the real power Earth commands." On the Exrixian flagship Crystal Dominance, Admiral Xerox stood at the helm of his war council, his mind racing. The events of the last few weeks had been nothing short of a shock. Not only had humanity outclassed them in battle, but now they were talking about an alliance, a relationship of equals, something Xerox could hardly have fathomed a few months ago. "Do you think they'll truly cooperate?" Silith's voice cut through the tension. She had been a fierce advocate for resisting humanity's demands, but the recent developments had tempered her confidence. "They've already beaten us. They know we can't stand against them in battle." Xerox turned to face her, his expression hard. "They may have defeated us, but this alliance is a matter of survival. We're not just facing military might, we're facing their complete technological superiority. We must accept it, adapt, and figure out how to use it to our advantage." Silith remained silent for a moment, before speaking again. "If what they've shown us so far is only a fraction of their capabilities, we're truly on the back foot. But I wonder," she paused, her eyes narrowing, "how much more do they have? What else are they hiding?" Xerox didn't have an answer. His thoughts were consumed by that same question. They had underestimated humanity's military might, but now it seemed their true power lay in something far beyond what the Exrixians had seen. Back on Earth, Talden Cray was in the midst of his demonstration, showing the Exrixians the inner workings of humanity's advanced technologies. "These designs," he explained, his voice calm but charged with pride, "are based on a blend of organic and synthetic systems, a fusion we've perfected over decades. You've seen our warships, but now you'll understand that they are only one piece of the puzzle." Talden adjusted the plasma display with a flick of his wrist, and the schematic shifted, now revealing designs for humanity's most advanced technologies, neural interfaces, energy fields, self-sustaining ecosystems, and propulsion systems that far exceeded anything the Exrixians had. "These systems can replicate entire ecosystems on a scale you've never considered," Talden continued, We've engineered self-repairing materials, adaptive AI systems, and quantum-based computing networks that allow us to think faster, work smarter, and evolve at a rate you can't match. His eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. The Ares strike was just the beginning. The room fell into stunned silence as the Ixrixians took in the magnitude of what was being revealed. These weren't just weapons, they were the future of space travel, energy generation, and life itself. The Ixrixians, still reeling from their defeat, could hardly comprehend the scale of what Earth had been keeping hidden. "Captain," Ronak spoke up from his station, his voice steady. "The Ixrixians are recalculating their position. They're going to be more cautious moving forward, but they're definitely shaken. The question now is, do we offer them something more, or do we keep pushing our advantage?" Dax glanced at the laser plasma display, watching as the Ixrixians scrambled to recalibrate their understanding of humanity's potential. "We offer them cooperation, but only on our terms," Dax said, his voice firm. "We're in control now. Let them know that their military might doesn't scare us. They came here expecting to dominate. Now they'll understand that we play by different rules." In the heart of the Ixrixian fleet, Xerox paced back and forth in his private chamber, his mind spinning with the implications of the new information about humanity. The fact that Earth had hidden technologies more advanced than their own was a bitter pill to swallow. And yet, despite the humiliation, there was a glimmer of respect for the humans. They had fought not just with strength, but with intelligence and foresight. His mind returned to the proposal for an alliance. "They'll never allow us to dominate them again," he muttered to himself. "But if we play this right, perhaps there is still a way to benefit from this partnership." On Earth, Dale Vriska, the human diplomat, prepared for the next round of talks with the Ixrixians. He sat at the table, reviewing the proposals. The message was clear: humanity would not be bullied into submission. They would offer the Ixrixians a chance to work alongside them, to learn from each other, but only as equals. "Ready, sir," Dale said, as he stood up, a subtle but confident smile on his face. "They won't be happy with everything we're offering, but they'll have to accept it. They know what we're capable of now." Dax nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. Let them understand this cooperation doesn't mean submission, and if they try to push too far, we'll remind them who holds the cards." The Ixrixians, now fully aware of the power they were dealing with, reluctantly agreed to the terms presented. They would work with humanity, acknowledging Earth's technological and military superiority. The two species would cooperate, but the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. For humanity, this was a victory not just on the battlefield, but in the future they were now shaping. Earth had carved out its place in the galaxy, not as a lesser species, but as a dominant force in the interstellar community. The tension had shifted. No longer were they simply fighting for survival. Now humanity was negotiating from a position of power. The Ixrixians, humbled but not broken, began to consider the future, not just as conquerors, but as collaborators. And while the future held promise, there was still uncertainty. The Ixrixians had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating humanity, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Both sides, now keenly aware of each other's strengths, would have to adjust to a new reality, one where Earth stood at the center, poised to reshape the galactic order. "Prepare for the worst." Admiral Xerak's voice was grating, laced with urgency, as he stood before his command crew aboard the Crystal Dominance. His once unshakable confidence had been eroded in the face of humanity's overwhelming military prowess. He knew their time was running out. Their fleet had been decimated, their pride shattered. But now something far more dangerous loomed on the horizon. "They've been silent for millennia," Xerak said, his eyes fixed on the digital map of the galaxy spread across the plasma display before him. "But the Vex are stirring again. We can't afford to waste more time fighting each other." On the bridge of the Ares strike, Captain Dax Vanard watched the communication light flash. It was a secured channel. Dalen Vriska, ever the calm negotiator, was already at his side, his expression thoughtful. "It's from the Ixrixians," Dalen reported, his voice tight with controlled suspicion. "It's urgent." Dax nodded. "Put them through." The screen flickered to life. Xerak's image appeared, the bioluminescent hues of his skin pulsating faintly, his expression darkened with gravity. "Captain Vanard," he began, his voice betraying a rare vulnerability, "we need to talk. This isn't over." Dax's gaze never wavered. "You've lost. Your fleet is broken. The war is over. Zirak's eyes narrowed. No, Vanard. The war isn't over. We've faced the brunt of your military power, but there's something else coming. Something worse than any battle we've fought. The Vex are awakening. Dax leaned forward, his fingers tapping a rhythm on his console. Who exactly are the Vex? Zirak hesitated, his voice heavy with reluctance. The Vex are a race unlike anything you've encountered. They don't conquer, they assimilate, they consume entire civilizations, turning them into something else. There is no resistance, no survival. If they target us or you, there will be no fight. You will simply cease to exist as you are. A tense silence filled the room. Dax exchanged a look with Ronak, who was now beside him, his face unreadable. Why are you telling us this? Dax's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. After everything you've done, why would you want our help? Zirak's bioluminescence flickered faintly, almost like a sigh. Because we know that you humans have something we don't. Strength and technology. We cannot face the Vex alone. We need you whether you like it or not. The words hung in the air, thick with implication. Dax glanced over at Dalen, whose expression was now calculating. This isn't a request, Captain, Zirak continued, his tone heavy with an unspoken threat. It's a necessity. Dax's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. His mind raced, weighing the consequences of the decision before him. To align with the Isrixians was to give up control, but to ignore them could lead to a far worse fate. Humanity had only just tasted victory, and now they were faced with a new unknown threat that could eradicate everything they had fought for. We'll consider your offer, Dax said, his voice cold and final. But you're right about one thing. This isn't over. Days passed as the reality of the Vex threat settled in. Humanity and the Srixians, once bitter enemies, now faced an enemy they could not comprehend. The Ares strike had been repaired, its crew still riding the high of their victory, but that sense of triumph quickly gave way to dread. In the briefing room, Dax gathered his senior staff. They're an unknown, a threat we've never faced before, General Ilias Mornar said, pacing in front of a laser plasma display, showing the vague readings humanity had on the Vex. But we know one thing for certain, they're dangerous, and they'll stop at nothing to consume us, just like they did to other civilizations. We've got their tech to contend with now, Taldan Cray added, his voice steady but strained. We can only guess what kind of weaponry the Vex employ. And if they can assimilate a species, turn them into something they can control, it's a power we haven't encountered before. That's the worst part, Ronak said, his voice unusually somber. What they do to their victims isn't just destruction, it's an erasure. They become part of the Vex, a tool for their expansion. Dax rubbed his chin, lost in thought. So how do we fight something that consumes entire species? We have to be smarter than them. Dalen Vriska spoke up, his calm demeanor never wavering. We've already proven we can beat the Srixians. We just need to apply that same strategy, only now the stakes are much higher. Dax turned to Taldan. What do you have in mind? Taldan's fingers danced across the display, bringing up the schematics of a new weapons system humanity had been quietly developing, a weapon that utilized advanced quantum mechanics, something they hadn't yet revealed to the Isrixians. We've been working on this, Taldan began, and now's the time to unveil it. It's an energy pulse weapon designed to disrupt neural and organic systems. It's still experimental, but it could be the key to halting the Vex before they get too close. Dax studied the display, his brow furrowing as he took in the complexity of the system. How soon can we deploy it? Within a day, Taldan replied, but we'll need to test it first. We don't have the luxury of failure here. Dax nodded. Prepare it, and make sure it works. As the day of the weapon's first test neared, both the Isrixians and humanity continued their uneasy alliance, each side watching the other closely, trying to gauge the other's intentions. The tension was palpable. The Isrixians, once seen as invincible, now looked to humanity for answers they didn't have. Are you sure about this? Admiral Zirak's voice crackled over the comms as Dax stood with his officers in the control room, preparing for the final test of their new weapon. We are trusting you humans. We have no more options. We're ready, Dax replied firmly. But once we start this, there's no turning back. If the Vex are out there, we need to act fast. We can't afford to wait. The seconds stretched out as the crew worked in tense silence. Finally, with a deep breath, Dax gave the order, "Fire." The test weapon activated with a violent pulse of light, the force of it rippling through the ship. For a moment, there was nothing, then a cascade of readings flooded the display, confirming what they had hoped. The weapon was a success. It had worked, and it had worked beyond their expectations. "We're ready for the Vex," Dax said, his voice low but full of determination. "Let them come." With the weapon's success, the groundwork for a united front had been laid. Both humanity and the Isrixians, once at each other's throats, now stood together, their shared purpose stronger than any rivalry. But the threat of the Vex was still an unknown, something darker, more terrifying than either side had prepared for. "We may have the upper hand for now," Dax said, standing before his crew, "but there's still so much we don't know about the Vex. The real test starts now." The tension simmered, an undercurrent of fear running beneath the surface. Earth and the Isrixians had joined forces to face an enemy unlike any other. But as the Vex threat loomed, there were still too many questions, and too few answers. Dax stood at the bridge. His eyes narrowed as he studied the display before him. The Rixin fleet, now integrated with humanity's warships, formed an unlikely but necessary alliance. The weapon they had developed together was their only hope in facing the Vex, the terrifying force that had threatened to wipe them all out. The enemy was unknown. Their methods, their tactics, their technology, everything was a mystery. All they knew was that the Vex were unstoppable. And now both humanity and the Ixitrans were left to trust in each other's strength, and in the unknown power of their combined forces. The tension in the air was thick. On the other side of the room, General Ilias Mornar was seated reviewing the latest tactical data on his screen. The glow of the laser plasma displays flickered across his face, his brow furrowed as he glanced between the tactical layouts and Dax. "Admiral," Ilias said, his voice cutting through the silence, "this isn't like any enemy we've faced before. We can't predict them. We don't know what kind of weapons they wield or what kind of destruction they'll bring. Our calculations tell us it will be a battle like no other." Dax turned to face him, his expression steady, unwavering. "Then we do what we do best. We adapt, we overcome. We've given them everything we can," Ronak added from the other side of the room, his voice calm but laced with a quiet apprehension. "But they're unpredictable. If we make one mistake—" "We won't," Dax interrupted, his gaze flicking to the massive viewport that stretched before them. The distant stars glimmered, cold and indifferent. "Because we've prepared for this." This he gestured to the alliance of human and Ixitran fleets. "This is what makes us stronger than they could ever realize. We've been prepared for this moment since the first day we knew we could be the hunted." The door slid open, and Taldan Cray entered the room, his expression grim. "The weapon's ready, Captain. All systems are fully operational. If the Vex show themselves, we'll be able to fight back." Dax's eyes met his, filled with a quiet determination. "That's all we need, Taldan. We don't need luck. We need strategy. We need strength." Taldan nodded but said nothing more. There was no need. The tension was rising. Earth and the Ixitrans had united, but neither side truly knew what they were up against. Humanity had shown them power, and now they would show them their resolve. Across the fleet, the Rixian commanders were in similar states of readiness. In their briefing room, Zirak stood alongside his top officers, surveying the data on the screen in front of him. Despite their loss, despite their humiliation at humanity's hands, he knew the alliance with the humans was their only shot at survival. "This is it," Zirak muttered under his breath, his voice barely a whisper. "The Vex will be here soon. We cannot afford another failure. The humans, they're our last hope." The Ixitran officers stood stiffly, nodding in agreement, but their silence was heavy. There were no grand speeches, no rallying cries. The Vex were not to be taken lightly. The stakes had never been higher. "Admiral," one of his officers said, "we've shared everything with the humans. Our best technology, our strategies, our knowledge, it's all on the table now. We move forward together, or not at all." Zirak nodded. "We move forward together. We cannot afford to divide ourselves any further. The Vex will not care about our pride. They will only care about victory, and we will meet them with everything we have." On the Ares strike, Dax turned back to his crew. The anticipation in the room was thick. The time for preparation was over. Now the real test would begin. "We know what we face," Dax said, his voice steady, but laced with the weight of the truth. "The Vex are ruthless, And we're not just fighting for survival, we're fighting for the future, for every species in this galaxy. The room was silent, the crew's eyes locked on Dax as they awaited his next words. But we are not like the others. We don't just fight, we adapt, we survive. And when they come, he paused, letting the words sink in, we'll remind them why Earth stands on top. For a moment, there was no sound except the subtle vibrations of the ship around them, the silent hum of an engine. But Dax knew that in each of their hearts, they felt the weight of the words. Humanity had endured too much to be extinguished now. The moment of truth arrived. On the plasma displays, the first signs of the Vex fleet began to emerge. The strange otherworldly vessels, incomprehensible in their design, appeared on the radar, fast, efficient, and completely alien. No one spoke, but the air in the room felt charged with an invisible force, as if the universe itself had held its breath. They're here. Ronak's voice was grim. Zirak's transmission came through moments later, the Rixian admiral's face hard with resolve. We will make our stand together. All forces are aligned. The Vex will not conquer us. Dax's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. Let's show them who they're dealing with. The two fleets moved into formation, the human ships and the Excitran vessels now aligned side by side. Together they were a formidable force, a force that had learned from each other, adapted, and now stood as one. We're ready, Dax said, his voice steady, despite the weight of the moment. Let them come. The first wave of the Vex ships launched forward, their strange pulsating forms, twisting in space like predators, stalking their prey. The Ares strike, and the Excitran ships didn't flinch. They had already seen the worst that could be thrown at them. Now they were ready to throw everything they had back. As the battle began, the sheer brutality of the Vex assault was revealed. Their ships were unlike anything Dax or Zirak had encountered. They absorbed and regenerated damage with unnerving speed, their weapons tearing into the hulls of both human and Excitran ships. But humanity's weapon, the one they had kept secret, flared to life, a surge of energy cascading from the Ares strike, cutting through the alien forces with an intensity that sent ripples of shock through the Vex ranks. Dax's orders rang out across the comms, each one deliberate, calculated. Deploy all firepower, focus on their command ships. Despite the damage, despite the growing chaos, humanity's ships fought with the ferocity of creatures determined to survive. They moved as one, a deadly dance of steel and fire. The Vex fleet, unable to keep up with humanity's speed and innovation, faltered. The coordinated attack by the humans and the Excitrans slowly overwhelmed the alien forces, their ships faltering under the combined might of Earth's weaponry and the Excitrans' alien technology. The battle stretched on, hours of ferocious combat that felt like eternity. But in the end, humanity stood triumphant. The Vex fleet, once vast and threatening, was now a scattered remnant, retreating into the vastness of space. The remaining alien ships, crippled and broken, limped away, no match for the power that humanity and the Excitrans had brought to bear. As the battle finally wound down, Dax stood, his expression resolute. This is it, he said softly. The galaxy now knows what humanity is capable of. Zirak's voice came through, ragged but victorious. We have survived. Together, with the Vex threat dealt with. For now, the two fleets stood together, united. The tension that had defined their relationship was replaced by a shared understanding. Humanity, with its strength and ingenuity, had proven its place among the stars, and the future, uncertain as it was, now belonged to them. As Dax gazed out into the endless night of space, he knew that Earth's dominance had been solidified, not through conquest, but through sheer force of will and innovation. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had carved its place in the galaxy.